Okay, so ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? But we don't have an attention deficit. We have abundance of attention. We have plenty.
Sure.
We just aren't good at directing it. So we can give a lot of things our attention. We can give it too much attention and hyperfocus and turn that into a whole situation as well. So it's not a deficit of how much we don't have too little attention. We just aren't really good at like pointing it in the right place. So that's one thing that we can incorporate is how can we make it more interesting? How can we make it fun? We want it to be challenging, but not too challenging. We want there to be pressure, but not too much pressure. So if we can figure out our specific stacks and put those all together, we can get a lot more done.
Hello and welcome to the Studio Takeover podcast. I am your host, Kat Ford Coates. Today, I'm talking with Jen Swedhin. Jen Swedhin is the owner of Team Get Shit Done. And I think you're going to appreciate this conversation. Jen, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Great job pronouncing my last name.
Thank you.
You know, it's not my last name. I married into it. And it's a made up name anyways. They just made it up when they came over from Sweden. So it's fine, but good work pronouncing it. It's a weird one.
Okay. So one of the reasons I was super excited to invite you and actually get this scheduled together is you really have this beautiful way of showing up, not just for Team Get Shit Done, right? The organizational piece and like, hey, here's some tools and resources to make your life as an entrepreneur easier, your client communication, how you manage your projects, you know, because once you get out of the Google only space, right? It's like, how do I do this? Right. And setting up CRMs in general is kind of a time suck. But even just in talking to you, you know, on the times we've been together in different places, you have this way of presenting things that's just like, oh, I never looked at it like that. But then as we got to know one another, I also, you know, came to find like you are a coach in ADHD and especially like working with as a photographer, right? And then helping other photographers with this business. I imagine that ADHD coaching comes into play into that space because I would say the majority of creatives, you know, are in that space personally, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed. And there's such a stigma behind it. So having somebody like to help you kind of walk through that space and knowing like there's support available and there are tools and resources and how we can view it because it's always been so stigmatized.
I would agree with that in the creative field.
In the creative space, yeah.
There's some discussion of are people with ADHD creative because our brains are just formed differently? They're formed differently at birth. Does that lead to the creativity? Or is surviving with ADHD or neurodivergence what causes us to become creative because we have to come up with creative solutions? Could be both. I don't know. But definitely the creative entrepreneurs have much higher propensity to be somewhere in the neurodivergent spectrum. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that there is a difference between autism and ADHD and ADD and, you know, sort of where you run in that space because you can have more than one of those diagnoses as well.
Definitely.
Like you can.
So actually, there's no difference between ADHD and ADD.
Okay.
That name was changed a lot, like 30 years ago, a long time ago. And we just, as society didn't really caught up to it, but they are the same thing. But yes, when it comes to like neurodivergence is a big spectrum. And that includes more than just autism and ADHD. There's OCD, BPD, all sorts of, there's a whole bunch in there. And because it's a spectrum, you can land on a bunch of different points. You can have just one, you can have, you know, little flavors of everything mixed together. And
flavors.
They all work together to create your own special brand of struggles, but your own special brand of gifts as well.
Well, and I like that you sort of brought up like they can introduce those struggles and help you develop the skills. Like there are positives and negatives. You know, I spend a lot of time speaking with, you know, photographers wanting to elevate their businesses. And I would say close to all of them at some point will reference their ADHD and not wanting to bring it out into the world, or they can't because, right? And that always leads into the conversation around like what tools and things have you created in your routine and how you address things and realize people? Because especially with the space of portrait, it is about connecting with people. So many of them also have those like empathetic, I don't want to say tendency, but inclination, like that empathetic bias to where they're not sure in that connection with someone else if that belongs to them or that it belongs to the other person they're with. But then with the ADHD side of things, they want to overthink it and then blame themselves. And, I think you referred to it earlier before we started recording as masking and how exhausting that can be, because we sort of, because of all of the stigma, have always looked at any of these diagnoses or assumptions, right, as having this huge stigma attached to it, and we're weird and we're broken and there's something wrong with us, when really it's about just learning to embody those things.
Yeah, so there is a lot of stigma. I feel like with ADHD TikTok, autism TikTok, our stigma is starting to decrease, which is a really good thing, because our brains literally are just formed differently at birth. There's nothing you can do about it. We didn't cause this. It's not a shameful thing. But a lot of shame comes into it because of the executive dysfunction that comes along with it, which means we should on ourselves. We should on ourselves constantly. Like, I should be able to make myself brush my teeth every day. I should be able to pay my bills as an adult. I should be able to XYZ, whatever the thing is. And we know with attention deficit disorder or any of the neurodivergence, really, we know what we need to do. We just can't do it. We want to. We just can't. We can't activate on it. And that's where the shame and the stigma comes in, because that kind of feels like crap. It feels embarrassing and shameful that, like, I know I need to work, but my insides are screaming to work and my body is just frozen. So I will just doom scroll, or I will just go play video games or whatever. There's so many things that stack up for that. The reward system and the internal monologue and all of these things that are a struggle for us that we just can't make happen. And that's where the shame comes in. And it can get easier. We can learn tools and systems to manage these things. We can learn how to mask in a less impactful way, or ideally to not mask at all and still be able to navigate the world and function throughout our day and still provide really great service. We can create systems that make us more consistent, so our clients have a really good, consistent thing without it draining us, without us making so many decisions. So there's a lot of tools that we can put into place to make this easier. And we know for a fact there's highly successful people that run profitable studios, long-term businesses that have neurodivergence and that can function, but maybe they're not functioning well in every area of life.
For me, like, it's, it can be some days where it's like, I'm just going to work from home. I'm going to live in pajamas. And then that work from home turns into coffee and doom scrolling on the porch. And like, oh, wait, I was supposed to go and do X, Y, and Z. And so like the shame comes with the should.
Yes, absolutely. And we're motivated by interest. It's all interest based. Okay, so ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? But we don't have an attention deficit. We have abundance of attention. We have plenty.
Sure.
We just aren't good at directing it. So we can give a lot of things our attention. We can give it too much attention and hyperfocus and turn that into a whole situation as well. So it's not a deficit of how much we don't have too little attention. We just aren't really good at like pointing it in the right place. And we really need it to be interesting. And so that's one thing that we can incorporate is how can we make it more interesting? How can we make it fun? We want it to be challenging, but not too challenging. We want there to be pressure, but not too much pressure. So if we can figure out our specific stacks and put those all together, we can get a lot more done. So for example, if you're working from home and you know you need to get to working, you probably didn't trigger or activate your get to work mode, which is really important because we need that kind of build up to like put us then onto autopilot. So for me, these have to be on. I have to be in a specific spot in my house. The light has to be a certain way. If it's too bright, then my brain's like, let's play. And I can't get anything done. It has to be like just the right level. I have to be listening to the specific thing. I have to have the ability to stim. So like use up some of my focus here with what I'm hearing, use up some of my focus with my hands, with like what I'm playing with. So all these little things I need to stack up.
Okay. So you're incorporating environmental elements as well as all five senses.
Yeah. So see, with that abundance of attention, we need to use as much of it as we can. Because when there's a reserve of focus that our brain's not using, that's where our brain gets wild on us and is like, hey, who was that actor from that last season of Abbott Elementary? And then you're like, I don't know, but I better go look it up. And then you derails your whole day, right? You never get back to it. You spend 3 hours on IMDb looking up nonsense, because that's the area that our brain's like, I have this attention, I need to put it on something, and it always chooses the wrong thing. So if we can say our task takes up 50% of our attention, if it's retouching, it takes up less, that's boring. Mm-hmm. But, let's say we're taking up 50%, we have to find something to do with that other 50%. So maybe it's watching a Netflix and having some sort of fidget near you and having a blanket on your lap or a candle going, something like that. So every little bit of that attention is going somewhere, but in a non-distracting way, just giving your brain something to chew on for a little bit. This can also go to the negative. Which
is why the phone can't be the fidget.
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. And why our fidgets can't actually be something we have to engage with. So if you're watching a show, it probably shouldn't be a new show. It should be a repeater show that you can just passively watch. Maybe it shouldn't be snacking. That was my big fidget until I got diagnosed and realized that's what I'm doing, is I'm just using up attention. But I was snacking all day, which wasn't healthy for me. Right. And then as soon as I could put my attention elsewhere, then I returned to like a normal eating habit and schedule. So these are all ways that these are just one of our tools in our toolbox of getting things done, because that repeater show, if you're using it while you retouch, it's not going to always work. Some days your brain is going to be like, boring, I don't care. Like, feed me. And you have to find something new.
So, it's really identifying like where your habits are, like what routines have you already put into place that maybe you don't even know why, right? Yeah. Like if it's, I go to bed, I turn on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I eat popcorn, like, because that's literally my routine every single night. And so when I'm on the road, right, it's like, oh, okay, I can log into Hulu on my phone and just have that on in the background. Or I have habits when I'm on the road, right? Like, oh, I can listen to that Oceanscape tonight, right? Because it's just the same thing over and over again. Yeah. But it's definitely having that auditory piece. Now, as creatives in business, when you're in the space of overwhelm, right, and carrying all of the shame and all of the things that comes with, I should be farther along. Why don't I have a portfolio that I love? Why isn't this getting any better? Things should be happening faster. Why am I not selling? Like, as somebody with ADHD, right, as a creative who's like, look, I just want to shoot and get paid. Why does that have to be so hard? Well, because we're looking at being the CEO of a business. Then there's the whole money conversation, right? But it's about being able to regulate yourself to embody that CEO, as well as manage yourself, manage your empathy, manage your routines, what moves the needle. Like, is there a decompression phase when people get overwhelmed?
Well, for neurodivergence, it's hard. So there's a couple of things at play here. Is one, so all brains, neurodivergent, neurotypical, have two modes in their brain. It's basically on and off. Default mode network, and then the like active work network. Okay. Default mode is when we ruminate on things, we daydream. That's where we spend a lot of our time. And then we have to switch over to like the active work network. And that's when we're actually doing like thought intensive tasks. Like we're actually actively doing stuff, and then we switch back. It's like back and forth. ADHD brains get stuck in that default mode, and we have a really hard time switching to the active mode for a lot of reasons. Actually, it's just like physically, it's hard for us to switch over as well. So that's where the ruminating thoughts live and our daydreaming live, which means if you get that thought pattern in your mind of, I should be farther along, I'm not that good at what I do, you're going to circle it there forever. And every time you think through that, it creates a new neural pathway. Thoughts lead to emotions, lead to actions, lead to results. That's the path every time. So that thought cycle that we get stuck on there, leads to the emotion that leads to the action, or typically inaction, which leads to the result, which we're not that good. So that thought pattern keeps us stuck in not improving and not doing better. So we have to work really hard to change that thought pattern and break out of that ruminating thought. We'll continue to ruminate, but imagine if we continually ruminated on, I'm still learning, I'm still growing, this will get better, instead of, you should be farther along, everyone's better than you, everyone's thinking about how stupid this job is for you, all those old stories and nonsense that we tell ourselves. So that's really hard to do, but just acknowledging that, like, my thoughts are power, they're everything, and trying to reframe those can be really helpful. But then once you do get into that overwhelm, it's our nervous system that has to be replaced. So whether you're in like a full shutdown or you're just burnt out, it's all about resetting that nervous system, which again, for us is really challenging. There's not an easy quick, easy fix for that. Besides giving yourself some grace, like chill out. This isn't a race. There are no standard metric. All this is obviously easier to say than to believe, but this is all made up. You are making up your own standard here. You are the only one putting this pressure on yourself. Like, I know, sure, you probably have to pay bills and there's all those things, but in terms of my portfolio is not as good as it should be, or I've been in business 12 months and I'm not doing as good as this person that's been in business 5 years. Like, duh, these are always going to be in flux. Every single creative on the planet has a portfolio that they're like, could be better. When the rest of us are like, it's amazing.
Are you kidding me? Yeah.
Like, yeah, I would love to have that. But, it's just like every person that you think is classically beautiful probably has the struggles of, I'm not pretty enough, I'm too fat, I'm whatever. Everyone has their own internal shitstorm that they're telling themselves. So why would you be any different? Of course you are. Start adjusting those initial thoughts and the emotion changes, which means the action changes and the result changes.
Yeah. I mean, thoughts are power, right? And then the application of those thoughts is when like things start to really move and shift. But speaking of shifting,
we can't activate unless that initial thought leads us down a path that allows us to. So our typical action from a shitty thought is inaction, avoidance. We spend a lot of time in avoidance, right? If we don't know what we're doing, if we're afraid of the outcome, if it's scary, if it's hard, we just
it feels unsafe at that point.
Yeah. And avoidance is safe because inaction is always safer than action. But in reality, inaction breeds more fear because you continue to not know, you continue to not thrive, you continue to be stuck in whatever pattern that you're stuck in.
Well, and then that becomes like a primal piece, right? Like that's, I call it phoenixing, right? Where we burn everything to the ground because I know I can survive in this struggle space, right? Versus this success that I keep saying I want, that I keep working every day toward is really kind of foreign. And I don't know that I can survive it. Yeah. So it's much easier for me to just sabotage it all and start over. And then I can be prideful that I was in a really bad spot, but I brought it back.
But I survived. I'm still here. Right. And it also kind of feeds into, we have a really hard time seeing the end result of things, whether you have a visual mind or not. I have aphantasia. I can't see anything in my brain. But when we're trying to picture future success or what success looks like or how we know when we're successful or what our life will be like if we make $1 million, we can't. Maybe we can picture that, but can we reverse our way back? Most of the time we can't picture that, which is why if someone says, hey, create this 10-page PDF, you're like, I'm going to see an example first. If I see an example, done. I can do anything. Start me with a template, done. I can create anything. But if I just have a blank sheet and someone's like, hey, make this, I'm like, I've never made anything in my life. I don't know what even a pen is. Like, what are you asking me to do here? Any example though. But these foreign things like success, I don't know what my life would look like if I made $1 million a year. I cannot conceptualize that. I can maybe get inklings, but because I can't see it, I can't reverse engineer the steps to get there. And that's the thing that's really hard for a lot of us is figuring out how to break it down and picture what success looks like, what that means, who you will be when that happens, whatever your milestone is. Like, I don't know what it would look like to book 60 clients a year because I'm currently booking 20, whatever that jump is. It's really hard for us to activate on that jump because the end result is unknown.
Completely.
Yeah, it's totally, intangible and questionable. Will I even like when I'm there? I don't know because I can't see it. What if I start on this path and I change my mind? We have that thought because we don't trust ourselves and we change our mind all the time. There's all those unknowns, and that's what also keeps us in that avoidance and activation cycle.
Well, yeah, but when you can't consider the outcome, 20 to 60 clients, $1 million a year, like it's really valuable for people to start like, well, okay, if you can't imagine it, why do you want it?
Right.
What is it about that feels attractive? And that's really, because that's actually one of the questions that, I go through when I'm talking to photographers who are considering coaching. I'm like, what does that look like? If you're at the $2K a month in revenue space, okay, that's $500 a week. After everything's said and done, you're keeping like $150. So like, why do we want to quadruple that? Right. Well, because I know I need more money, right? There's the rational, like, well, I need to make more, right? But then it's, okay, let's talk through really what embodying that looks like. What changes about your life when the stressors are no longer in front of you?
Yeah.
Right? When things are like, do you feel lighter? What are the physical responses? Right? And then what kind of support would you need? Right. And I think that's one of the things I really appreciate about how you've kind of structured your business, right? The support on the tactical and the strategy and, that client journey so that the details and minutia of all of the things are really kind of managed. Then you have the retouching. And I think you'd said too, like the retouching piece is really pretty booked out, but then also the ADHD coaching. Now you came into this space as a photographer, right? You were in the boudoir space for some time.
Yeah, I was a photographer for maybe 10 years, something like that.
What was the shift where you're just like, I'm just kind of bored and I'm interested in this thing over here. So I think I'm going to focus on that.
What it came down to is I was just about to move to a new city. I wasn't as booked. I knew I was going to have to start over when I moved to that city. I liked what I did. Photography has never been like my art passion. It's just something that I developed skills around. Someone I respected was looking for a virtual assistant. I was like, I have a background in this, me. And he was like, no, you're overqualified. Absolutely not. Then I was like, but like, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I might actually like, I'm really good at that side of stuff. I'm fine with photography, but like, I can totally build you a website. I can totally strategize things. Like these are all things I'm really good at, like doing stuff. And then hence Jen Get Shit Done was born, which is now Team Get Shit Done. We've grown. But yeah, that was kind of the transition, and it's morphed a bunch of times as I figure out, yes, I'm good at it, but do I want to do it? That path that every business owner has to take. But the way my brain works is I'm pretty equal parts creative and strategic. But the strategic part definitely has all that creativity in it. So that's a lot of times where my creativity comes through, is really like taking big concepts and breaking it down really simply, making it digestible. And I know that a lot of photographers suck at that, which is fine. And I think it's important to know everything I do is learning how to work with your brain instead of fighting it, because your brain is your brain. You can't control it. It controls you. Let it make decisions. Just be cool with it. And if you're bad at it, let someone else do it. If you're bad at sending emails, then get a system that sends it for you. It's that simple.
Well, and you navigate to other platforms too. Like I know we've talked about the email piece and you were like, hi, Facebook. Hey, what's going on? This is happening in your world, right?
Yeah. It's all about working with your brain. What makes sense for you? What works for you? And so I'm good at doing the things people are bad at. So why wouldn't I do them? I know I have a team that helps me do things that people are bad at. But photographers are creatives. It's ridiculous to think that as a photographer, we're not only really good with connecting with people, because that's important, also knowing our gear, knowing our lighting, knowing how to pose, knowing how to post-produce, knowing how to deliver images, design albums, all of that stuff. That's a lot of stuff on its own, right? We're also expected to know how to invoice properly, set up a whole CRM, send reminders, market, book people, schedule, send those reminders, send questionnaires, create questionnaires. There's so many things. It's
marketing
an insane amount
and
of stuff,
Google
really.
and SEO and all of
Yeah. And it never ends. It's always something new. It's always continuing. So it is absolutely bananas that we expect ourselves to not only know how to do all of those, but know how to do it well and be able to manage all of it. You're just one person. Even if you're a team, you're just a couple of people. That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
It's okay to not be good at all that stuff.
There are phases, right? Like, and when we come into avoidance, I talk to all of these photographers and they're like, well, I hate the marketing, so I want to outsource it. But, you're a one-man band and like, you just aren't doing the volume to outsource that yet, right?
Yep.
Instead of outsourcing the minutia that is keeping you from the money generating activity, you would rather just outsource that and then avoid the back end. And then next thing you know, like you've got late notices, websites turned off, things like that because
right. You triple booked a client.
Right.
Like
because
three clients show up to the studio on the same day. Like nothing makes you feel like shit faster than that. Right. And it's easy stuff to do, but it's also a thing that doesn't have to happen. You just got to tighten up systems.
Anytime you can focus on the things that you have a natural bias toward or that you love, that's where the magic happens. But that doesn't mean that it's just you wake up one morning and you're like, I'm done doing this thing, right? It's like, okay, well, if that means that's going to cost you $2,000 a month to have somebody else manage X, Y, and Z, maybe you need to plan for that, right? And then start envisioning the outcome of somebody else doing it. I could just break all of the social media parts down from the blog and just have them redirect everything. And I don't have to spend an hour and a half every morning making a reel. Like that's how I get into the vision of the outcome, right? Is, well, if this, then that, right? Like, yeah. How do you get there? Because if we really can't see it just because somebody over here is telling us we want it or that it's an option, if you have zero appreciation of what that looks like, I have to look at it and pretend it's happening right now.
So we're only motivated by interest, right? I will do anything if it's interesting to me, if it's fun, if it's the right amount of challenging. If my brain finds it interesting, I'll do it, no problem. But as soon as something stops being interesting or it starts being too challenging or not challenging enough, this is where a lot of things like I figure out how to market and manage my system and everything's good, but then it's no longer challenging. So now I'm just not going to do it because it's boring. Mm-hmm. As soon as we move from learning to boring, we stop doing it. So those are the good things also to outsource if you have a neurodivergent brain, because if it's boring, you will not do it. Or it'll take you 20 times longer to do it and you'll hate it and you'll get burnt out faster because you're like trudging your way through it. So once you hit that point where you're like, I literally can't make myself do this thing.
Well, it's funny that you mention it that way, because one of my avoidant tendencies is to refine systems.
Oh, me too.
Well, good. Strategy's number one, right?
Let me go fiddle. Yep. Number one for me too. Let's go fiddle with that just a little bit.
I
know I need to launch this program, but instead let me go ahead and just like fiddle with the program a little bit, or like, I just better like add a few more emails to the sequence, or let me like tighten up this thing. Procrastinate. Also, where I'm like, you know what is really important today is for me to clear out and organize my Google Drive. If I don't do it today, life is over. Yeah. Everyone will die and I'll miss too many people. So do I need to do that? No. Did I do that? Yeah. And I have a really tidy Google Drive. And it's benefiting me not at all, because I find things just as quickly. But I did spend that whole Tuesday organizing it instead of launching the program because there was uncertainty around the program.
Man.
Mm-hmm. Fiddling. And everyone has their thing, their avoidance thing. Mine is learning and tweaking, refining.
Yeah.
Man. A big avoidance that I see in people is just not making decisions, like waffling.
Well, indecision is still decision.
Yeah. So we have these are my two options. Which should I work on? They both feel equally important. And instead of finding a way to like move through, they are very comfy, stuck in that, like, I don't know. Let me sit on this for 3 weeks.
But that's still a choice.
Yes. And it's full avoidance.
Survival. I know I can survive here, even though they're equally important.
Yeah. But what if I choose the wrong one? What if I'm wrong? We spend a lot of time there. What's the worst that could happen? Which is fine. We need to walk that multiverse. Like Sue says, we need to think about like, what are the various outcomes of this that could happen? That's important.
That's being objective. Sure.
On the other side, what we need to do is what's the best that could happen? This is the more likely scenario. And we never walk that path. Always the like, what could go wrong?
Yep.
How foolish could I look? Instead of what could go right? What if I fully book it in 2 days? What if, because that's likely what's going to happen. The best case scenario.
Right. But it's that abundance versus constraint. And I know abundance is, like a big buzzword right now, but it's also, appreciating, what's the quote? What if I fail? Oh, my darling, but what if you fly? From Marianne Williamson. Because it's about survival, right? It's, I can't die. Like I have to survive. So I have to protect myself and feel safe and all of the things. But what happens if you just live your life and get what you wanted? That's why you took the steps to get to this decision process. And now we're going to hold back because of something.
And see, that all circles back to that initial thought. One is I'm going to fail, and one is I'm going to fly. That leads to a different emotion, which leads to different actions, which leads to different results. Start with the result. What do you want? Work your way back. What thought patterns do I need to be working on in order to get to that result? That's it. That's the pathway.
Oh, I love that pathway. I love it so much.
It's, again, easier said than done. It takes a lot of practice. I'm proof that on the other side of it, my negative self-talk was like a whole situation of here's what people are saying about you. Here's what people think about you. Here's how you're being judged. And once I was able to change those thoughts, so the way I started was I went from picturing, like I would imagine conversations other people were having about me. That was my favorite form of self-torture. So I just shifted those to imagining people having conversations saying like, oh yeah, she's so great. She's so talented. She's so nice. It took so little time just for that seed to change everything about my life. I was no longer concerned because I knew in my mind people were saying nice things about me. Of course, I am very aware I'm not that special. No one's thinking about me. No one's talking about me. No one's thinking about anybody else but themselves. I know this. But that was the pattern that I was in. And just changing that one little thought cycle let me change all of the thought cycles. So it's very rare that they come in now that have that take me down the wrong path. Because I can
and it spins up, right? Like
definitely. And then it circles back. You get the bad result, it goes back to the bad thought. And by bad, I mean, the path that you're not wanting.
Sure.
Being able to just change that plant that one seed for myself means that now any situation comes through, because the situation leads to the thought, any situation that comes through, I can much more quickly have a thought that's going to lead me down the path towards the result and the action that I'm interested in. Not the result of I ruminate, I shame spiral, I feel like shit, I alienate people, I blame other people, all of those things I used to do. Now it leads me down the path of I'm growing, I'm successful, I give myself grace, I, run a 6-figure business, whatever, all the things that I want it to be, because just that one initial thought.
I love it. Well, and how that unfolds to allow you to start envisioning different outcomes, right? Like just that shift from, all of the negative nonsense. And we all do it. Every single one of us does.
Limiting beliefs.
Right. Oh.
But I could have never thrived if I was always under the assumption that everyone didn't like me. And that was just my specific one. Everyone has something different. I'm not that good at my job. I'll never be a good photographer. People are pissed at me. This client's going to fight with me. I don't make good decisions. Whatever that thing is, it keeps you stuck. I could have never grown the business that I'm growing without changing those initial thoughts. Even last night, I had just a quick weird thought where I don't take myself very seriously because I'm a goofy, weird person. Man, wouldn't it be wild if people took me seriously, then immediately I was like, they do. Like, you're making a lot of money with people just asking you for your advice.
Mm-hmm.
So that little sneaky thing still is in there because I spent so many years with that being the thing. No one takes you seriously. People think you're weird and goofy or mean or whatever that pattern was. So it still came in and I was like, you don't take yourself seriously, which is fine. People do though. So
yeah, one of the things
it all circles around
that I did as a kid, like through kindergarten, through like middle school, early high school, like I was bullied a lot. And it was like the same chapter of people year in and year out. And luckily, like I grew into my height early on. I think I was 5'6" by like 11. And the people that were in those like cells of kids, whatever, grew to be like 5'3", 5'4" as adults. So as I started to really like outpace them in height and build, I realized like that could be intimidating for people. So as a form of protection, right? Everybody hates me. I'm gross. I'm fat. I'm stupid. I'm ugly. Like all of the things. I was like, well, if I stay really quiet and just tall, be the bear, right? Now people won't pick on me, make fun of me, do all of the things. And I realized like, as I came into different professional careers, like I'm a professionally trained opera singer and a network architect in IT and ran bars for 100 years, like been in several spaces, but all of them had a social component. But in photography specifically, especially as I elevated into the teaching space versus just the shooting space, because I can, wheel and deal and network and, have all the fun.
Masking.
Yeah, for sure. But in the space with students or people who were learning from me really softened, because what worked for me as a 12-year-old does not work for me as a 47-year-old, right? Yep. Like being intimidating is not how you garner business. And so relearning that identity, that mask, right? And being like, well, I'm not running a bar anymore. I don't have to play security. I don't have to bounce people out of the room. Like, this isn't Roadhouse anymore. Like, I actually need to be softer and more openly kind and smiley and fun, right? So that people aren't intimidated by me, because I'm not trying to protect myself from bullies anymore. Right?
So for you, it'll be interesting to determine, are you taking off the mask of that intimidating presence, or are you putting on a mask of softer, more open, more vulnerable? And no one can decide that but you.
Well, it's untangling.
You've been one way a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So you might be putting on a new mask, or you might be taking off an old mask.
Well, I think it's both.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
Because there is a version of me, because as a kid, I was really super naive, right? All children are, right? And just took people at face value and just everybody's good, blah, 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 right? But as I took on the identity of this, like, not mysterious, but quiet, large presence, blah, 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 like I took on that identity. So part of that has infused into my personality. It's just, look, I'm very quiet. I observe, and then I'm not quiet anymore, right? Once I'm comfortable in a space or with people, like, then things shift. But a lot of that really is about sharing those stories that allow me to be human, right? Yep. That not only is from a marketing perspective of give something for people to resonate with and identify with, but also uncovering like this aspect of me, right, is safe to be seen.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a really common story, in different presentations maybe, but a really common experience for neurodivergence because of that safety measure. Mm-hmm. We have to find the way to keep ourselves safe because we're weird. We're square pegs our whole life. If the world was made up of square holes, round holes can fit in it and we would be fine. But it's not. We're square pegs in a round whole world. And we have to find ways to kind of like trim off some of those edges or, make ourselves look different. So we aren't outed constantly as like, hey, what's with the freak over there? So we find different identities, different masks, different ways of showing up. And there's a really beautiful process as you age and you get more comfortable and you start embracing your neurodivergence and your gifts and your abilities and just who you are, or you just get tired because it's exhausting. And you start to remove those masks and really uncover what's under there, who you actually are, who you're safe to be, who you want to be. Show up as your, everyone says show up as the best version of yourself. I say show up as your favorite version of yourself. Right. My favorite version of me is definitely not the best version of me. It is for me, but
by
I like
showing up. Sure.
Exactly. Like, what standard are we measuring that by? But showing up as my favorite version of me is so much more comfortable. It's so much more liberating. It's so much more authentic and fun and peaceful. It's really peaceful to take that down and just like, this is who I am. And building a community of people that like it. The first time my friends proved to me that they actually liked my weird version of me, I was like, it's great because I never have to apologize anymore for being weird. I never have to ask permission to be weird. I just am super, super weird and they're pumped with it.
I love it. Are you kidding? When you show up, you give permission to other people to embrace their shit, right? Yeah. And we spend so much time trying to be the best version. Like, I think they were putting together copy maybe for a campaign they were doing, but it was my associate photographer and they were talking about like the best version of you, the best version of you. And I said the same thing. And I was like, the favorite. Like the best for what? Especially with the transition into like the authentic space in media right now, which I think is wonderful, right? Like less retouching, it's just about extending that backdrop from there to there, but not actually addressing like texture or body shape. Like, I think that should be applauded. 7 Ways to Sunday, like the whole, but it's not about the best. It's about self-acceptance of who we are, good, bad, ugly, beautiful. Because once you can start embracing
the version of you like the most,
the quirk, the funk, the creative, the soft, the loving, the powerful, and the bold, like it's like a diamond.
And it leads to so much peace. So much peace. That's what we all deserve. Peace is available to you and you do deserve it. Also, it is important to recognize that we still have to mask sometimes. That's okay. If you choose to, there's no shame in that. If you go through your whole life masking because that's how you feel safe, that's okay. But if you can get to a place where you can unmask sometimes, or you can have a core crew of people that you can unmask with and just like spread those legs out a little bit here and there, that's where the real magic is.
Well, it's that acceptance. And like, I get like the masking in general, like, it's...
Yeah, if I show up to a conference, I'm going to be masked.
It's marketing, right? Like, who's the audience? Who do I need to connect with here? How can I show up as, the version of them that they will identify with? But it's also with the spin on it that allows you to be memorable. And so building masks is like building your marketing. It's how do you want
or even just keeping me safe. People exhaust me so much that if I didn't go into a conference masked, I would be on the floor exhausted in an hour. So having that mask up lets me interact and engage and navigate it and get what I need out of it. So if that's what people need to do, that is also very much okay.
Well, it's like a scuba tank, right? Like you can dive into the ocean without and expend a lot of energy very quickly coming up for air, swimming deep, coming up for air, or give yourself the tools you need to be immersed and enjoy the experience and not be totally wiped out in 10 minutes.
Yeah, and just maybe don't wear your scuba mask, home.
To dinner.
Yeah. Well, walking through the beach.
Well, Jen, tell me how it is that people can connect with you, right? Like, is there anything specific? I know you mentioned that the retouching side of the business is pretty packed. But if somebody needs support on the system side of things or with ADHD, how do they find you?
So through my website, teamgetshitdone.com is the best. You can set up a consultation, which is not a sales call. It's a chat. We both have to pass the vibe check. And you just ask me questions and see if I'm not a good fit. I will absolutely tell you and give you my suggestions on what would be good steps for you or where you can go to find the help that you need. So for coaching, I do one-on-one and group coaching. We'll have a group program opening up in probably a couple of months, which is going super well. People are getting a whole lot out of it. I only work with creative entrepreneurs. And I only work with neurodivergents typically. So I understand jumbled thoughts. I follow broken trains of thoughts very easily. You never have to apologize with me.
That's awesome. Jen, thank you so much for this conversation today. I always love like the adventures that we go on.
It's not so linear.
No, but that's what I love about it. Like, I know that's how my brain goes. And it's like, wait, glom on from here, glom on from there. But I appreciate you to the moon. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. This is great.